everybody to please stand. We're going to have a plenty of the national anthem. Thank you all. My name is Peter Chisholm. I want to welcome, on behalf of the Board of Trustees, President Javier Ceballos, who you will hear from shortly, and the Framingham student community. I want to welcome you here today for this special event when we remember the 2,606 people who died at the World Trade Center, the 265 people on the 4 planes, and the 125 people in the Pentagon. Because of my background as a Paul firefighter in Ashland, I knew a lot about the fire department of New York. On a few occasions, some fellow firefighters, myself, went to New York, used to ride with the guys on their apparatus. I always brought them by to visit the Pride of Midtown, Engine 54, Ladder 4, and Battalion 9. It's a station on 8th Avenue and West 48th Street, where presidents and vice presidents throughout the years have always stopped to say hello. Their motto is, never miss the performance. And on September 11th, they were at the big one. You may have heard the saying, all gave some gave all. That day, 17 members of the Pride of Midtown gave all. I also want to ask that we take a few minutes to think and remember all the 343 members of the fire department who died in the fire on duty that day, and still continue to die 20 years later from diseases picked up in the days, the weeks, the months, and the years following September 11th. And lest we forget, please remember the 23 officers of the New York Police Department and the 37 officers from the Port of New York and New Jersey Police Department who gave their lives on September 11th. Many have asked, why did so many have to die? Watch the films of that day, as civilians went for shelter, while police and fire were running in. In the months following the attack, I attended several firefighter funerals, including one where guests were asked to please send a note to the surviving children about their dad, and one when I entered an empty rectory prior to the mass to use the restroom. When I exited the restroom, there were 3 plainclothes detectives there, eyeing me. They were from the mayor's security detail, and I noticed out of the corner of my eye, the mayor of the city of New York, Rudy Giuliani, came over to shake my hand and thank you for attending the service. I was wearing my Class A uniform, and we talked for a few minutes. During these months of funerals, firefighters came from all over to say goodbye to their brothers, including one in December. We were lining up at a funeral when a fellow came running over with a garment bag over his shoulder. He used the record where he could change into his uniform. He explained he had just arrived on a red-eye flight from Seattle, Washington. And please, in your prayers today, remember the United States Marine Corps Sergeant Yohani Rosario from Lawrence. This father of Massachusetts comes home for the final time this Saturday, September 11th. As I conclude, I want to do so on a more pleasant note. I don't know if any of you read this particular story, but there was a young man, a person in Afghanistan who lived there, who served as an interpreter for the United States Army unit. He later immigrated to the United States and joined the Army. He was trying desperately to get his family out of Afghanistan. As came closer and closer to the deadline, he talked to people he knew. One Marine, I guess he knew, talked to another, and word reached Congress in Seth Moulton's office, Massachusetts, where he got the word that a soldier needed help. To make a long story short, and how they added Massachusetts flagellant, let me just tell you, about 2 weeks later, late at night, the family showed up at the location where they'd been told to report. They waited for a while, a couple trucks pulled up. They contained United States Marines. Nervously, the family walked over. They weren't sure who they were. They just saw these trucks with soldiers. They walked over and they said what they were told to say, Tom Brady. When they said Tom Brady, the Marines said, get in, we're off to the United States. And the family's in the United States today. Right now, I want to take a moment to introduce to all of you the president of Framingham State University, my boss, President Javier Stiles. He's one of our
Thanks, Peter. And good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this very, very special event. It's really hard to believe that it's been 20 years since that Saturday, since that horrific attack that occurred in 9/11. I know that all of us that were here remember exactly where we were when we saw that happening. And now, 20 years later, we have students on our campus that were not born when the towers fell. Of course, today we're dealing with a different tragedy, or a much different scale, with the COVID-19 pandemic. There is one similarity, however, between 9/11 and the current pandemic, and that is that our first responders are once again taking the lead in getting us through it. At this time, I would just like to take a moment to quickly recognize all the first responders who are in the room with us. So please, stand up, raise your hand, move, and so we can thank you for everything you do. Thanks for all you do to keep us safe. We are extremely honored today to hear from someone who played an integral role in the nation's response to 9/11. Andrew Card served as Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush from 2001 to 2006. After the South Tower was struck, it was Mr. Card who informed the President that America was under attack while he was reading to a classroom of elementary school children in Florida. And that is an iconic picture that I saw a copy that Adam Furbet, the chair of our school board, has of that moment. That is a very iconic moment. A Massachusetts native, Mr. Card's distinguished political career began as a state representative from Holbrook. He first served in the West Wing during the Reagan administration and was later appointed U.S. Secretary of Transportation for President George H.W. Bush. His post-government career included time as the acting dean of the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University, and in 2014 he was elected as the 5th president of Franklin Pierce University in Rich, New Hampshire. So ladies and gentlemen, it's a real honor for me to introduce Mr. Andrew Card.
Thank you, President Sparrows and Reverend clergy, elected officials, and first responders, faculty, students, friends, trustees. It is a privilege to be here. I am from Holbrook, which is not that far away, so I can park the car in Harvard Yard and you would understand me. In most places where I speak around the country, they don't. I'm thrilled to be here because I want to talk about the promises that I made, and I know other people in the room made the same promises. We promised never to forget. Framingham State University is a special place. It's a wonderful campus because of the diversity of the students who come here and the faculty who teach us here. And it's the hope that they bring to work every day or to the classroom is what we celebrate. But the truth is, we're entering a time of memory and memorial. It's not a time of celebration. September 20th will find different experiences, but for me, the experience of September 11th, 2001 extended from, obviously, the message of the attack on 9/11, through the President's speech on September 20th, when we were getting ready to go to war. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't remember what happened on that day 20 years ago, this coming Saturday. I was with the President. We arrived in Sarasota, Florida on the night of September 10th, 2001. After a remarkable day, September 10th had a ceremony at the Navy Yard about 5 miles from the White House. And it was a beautiful ceremony honoring the relationship between the United States and Australia. And the Australian Prime Minister was there. There was a fife and drum corps, there was a military parade, there was a passing review. Wonderful speeches, and a tribute to those men and women who helped us in World War II. And recognize the great relationship we had with Australia that helped us in Vietnam and in North Korea. We left that event and we piloted the Air Force One and we flew to Jacksonville, Florida. And the President went to a school in an auditorium about this size, and he addressed students and teachers and raised the hope that we could get rid of the soft bigotry of low expectation, and that we could change the nature of education so that everybody would benefit by it in our great country. As a sidebar, I point out that Massachusetts leads the nation in terms of educational opportunity because it's in our Constitution. But the President was committed to talking about getting more kids to stay in school longer, to do better, and to get rid of the bigotry of saying you passed just because you aged a year. He wanted students to learn. Leave no child behind. So after the event in Jacksonville, Florida, we flew across the state of Florida to Sarasota. And we landed at dusk. And I remember when the motorcade pulled up to the Colony Resort, which was a tennis and golf resort, there's a terrible stench in the air. The red tide had killed fish, they'd washed up on the shore, and I was struck by the terrible stench. We dropped our luggage off into the Colony Resort, and then we turned around and went back out and got into the cars that were in the limousines or the motorcade of the President. And we drove over to Tampa, St. Pete, to a restaurant. And the President actually didn't have to perform at any event. He was having dinner with a bunch of friends that his brother, the governor of Florida at the time, Jeb Bush, had put together. And the President stayed out late, something that George W. Bush did not like to do, because he was having a good time. And I remember coming back to the Colony Resort about an hour later than we were scheduled to, and I still had work to do. And the President went up to go to bed, and I went to my office or my hotel room and did some work and got to bed pretty late. I woke up early the next morning, knowing that the President was going to go to an elementary school, but I also knew he was going out for a jog. And I decided I would go out and check on the advance team and the Secret Service. And I stepped out of the hotel, and sure enough, that terrible red tide stench was still there. And I directed the advance team to change the motorcade around. I talked with the Secret Service agents, and then I tracked down the president's position. And I said, if the president goes for a run today at the golf course before he goes over to the elementary school, is he going to get sick because of the red tide stench? And he says, oh no, he'll be fine. I then went in to greet the president as he's getting up. And he was getting up out of bed, and he was putting on his running clothes because he was going to go running on the golf course. And then he was troubled because he invited a reporter to go running with him. His name was Stretch Kyle, Richard Dick Stretch Kyle. And he found out that Stretch Kyle had been an NCAA All-American cross-country runner. And the Bushes are very competitive. They don't let the grandkids beat them in checkers. And he was completely preoccupied with running on this golf course and questioning, why did I invite Stretch Kyle to go running with me? And as he's getting ready to leave, I said, when you get back, it'll be an easy day. You're going to the Emma E. Booker School in Sarasota, and you're going to be reading a book with second graders and talking about your favorite topic, which is leaving no child behind. And he said, okay, thanks. I said, oh, by the way, I checked with the doc, and don't worry about the red tide stench, we'll be all right. And he looks at me like, you're an idiot. I went and did some homework. The president came back from his run. He was feeling full of himself. He ran 7-minute, 20-minute miles for 4.5 miles. And he beat Stretch Kyle. So he was feeling pretty good. And he starts getting undressed, and I said, after you get undressed and then get dressed, we'll sit down and have our CIA briefing. And then we're going over to the Emma E. Booker School. He said, great. We had the CIA briefing. It was done by a fellow who ended up becoming acting director of the CIA named Mike Morrell. And it was a memorable briefing, but there was nothing startling in it. Nothing that would cause me to say, today is a different day. In fact, that day was a perfect day. There wasn't a cloud in the sky in the lower 48. It was a perfect day everywhere in America. After the CIA briefing, we went down and piled into limousines to go over to the Emma E. Booker School. And I remember 2 people asking a question. One was Carl Rowe, the other one was Dan Bartlett. And they said, did anybody hear about a plane crash in New York City? No one responded. We drove over to the Emma E. Booker School, and we went into a classroom that had been converted to a White House command center. And the president went to a secure phone, and he called back to his national security advisor, Dr. Condoleezza Rice. I didn't listen to that conversation, but the president told me later there was nothing dramatic in the conversation. I went into the classroom to see if it was ready for the president. So walked into the classroom, I saw the second graders all lined up with their teacher, Mrs. Daniels, Sandra K. Daniels. And she looked beautiful, and those students looked beautiful. And they were on their very best behavior. And then I looked at a group of reporters gathering in the press pool with Ari Fleischer. And they were not on their best behavior, they were on their typical behavior. I then checked the classroom out. I saw a misspelled word on a bulletin board, and I said, let's get a book cover and cover up that word. I didn't want a Dan Quayle potato moment. Most of you don't know what that was, but I do. And then I went into the holding room with the president. I'm standing with the president and the principal of the school at the door to the classroom, but in the holding room where the White House staff is gathered. As the president and the principal are about to go into the classroom, a Navy captain by the name of Deb Lauer, who went on to become an admiral, and she was the acting national security advisor on the trip and the director of the White House Situation Room, said to the president, "Sir, it appears a small twin-engine prop plane has crashed into one of the towers at the World Trade Center in New York City." The president, the principal, and I all had the same reaction. Oh, what a horrible accident. The pilot must have had a heart attack or something. And then the principal opened the door to the classroom. and she and the president went into the classroom. The door shut, and I was still in the holding room, and Captain Lauer came up to me and said, "Sir, it appears it was not a small twin-engine prop plane. It was a commercial jetliner." My mind flashed to the fear that the passengers on the plane must have had. They had to know it wasn't gaining altitude. I don't know why that's where my mind went, but that's where it went. But that was only a nanosecond, because Captain Lauer came up to me and said, "Oh my God, another plane hit the other tower at the World Trade Center." My mind flashed to three initials, UBL, Osama bin Laden. I knew about the attacks on the World Trade Center in February of 1993. I knew about Al-Qaeda. I then performed a test that chiefs of staff have to perform a lot. Does the president need to know? This was an easy test to pass, yes. I decided to pass on two facts and make one obvious editorial comment, but to do nothing to invite a dialogue with the president, because I presumed he was sitting under a boom microphone in front of a press pool and second-grade students. So I decided I would not do anything to encourage him to get up or to come with me or to talk with me. I opened the door to the holding room and I thought about what I would say. As I stepped into the holding room, the teacher, Mrs. Daniels, was conducting a dialogue between the students and the president. Say good morning to the president. Good morning, Mr. President. Back and forth they went. And I didn't want to interrupt that dialogue. And then Mrs. Daniels told the students to take out their books. And as the students were reaching under their desks to pull out their books, the pet goat, to read with the president, that's when I walked up to the president, who did not see me coming. I came from behind him, and I leaned over and whispered into his right ear, "A second plane hit the second tower. America is under attack." I then stood back from the president, so they didn't ask me a question. I was very impressed with how he responded. I could see his head bobbing up and down. He never turned around to me. He kind of started to, but his head was bobbing up and down. I honestly believe that was the moment that he really became the President of the United States, because he was probably anticipating what his responsibilities were. And they came from the oath that he had taken at noontime on January 20th of 2001, an oath to preserve, protect, and defend. So I think that's the day that he really became the president. It wasn't his agenda. It was the obligation to keep his oath. As I went back to the door, to go back to the holding room, I looked at the president again. He was still facing forward and his head was still bobbing up and down. I noticed the students were unbelievably attentive to their books. Their books were open and they were ready to read. I looked at the press pool and all the reporters were turned around talking to Ari Fleischer, the press secretary. Nobody was looking at the president. In my left peripheral vision, I saw Secretary of Education Rod Page and the principal of the school and a White House staffer named Sandy Kress, and they were kind of mouthing, "What's going on?" I then stepped back into the holding room, and the first thing I said was, "Get the FBI director on the phone." It was Bob Mueller. He'd only been the FBI director for 10 days. I said, "Get a line open to the vice president, get a line open to the White House Situation Room. Get the crew back on Air Force One and tell Mark Tillman we're going to have to leave." He was the pilot. To the Secret Service, I said, "Turn the motorcade around, we'll have to get ready to depart." To Dan Bartlett, the communications director of the trip, I said, "Get some remarks written for the president. He'll have to say something to the crowd that is gathered to hear him talk about education, but he cannot say anything we do not know to be the truth." The door opened up, and in walked the president. I was very impressed. While he sat in that classroom, he did nothing to generate fear from those young kids. He did nothing to demonstrate fear that would have been translated to the satisfaction of the terrorists all around the world. Instead, he thought about his job. When he walked into the holding room, literally the first thing that he said was, "Get the FBI director on the phone." And we could say, "He's right here, Mr. President." The president then went and talked to the vice president, the national security team. Then he called the governor of New York. I went around the classroom into the cafeteria gymnasium of the elementary school because I wanted to see what the president was going to be doing when he came out to speak. The crowd stood up when he walked in, and he sat them right down. And he started to speak, and the first thing he said, "I'm going to have to go back to Washington, D.C." And I'm thinking to myself, he does not know that we are going back to Washington, D.C. And I got mad at Dan Bartlett, the speechwriter. I said, "We don't know that we're going to Washington, D.C. It turns out Dan Bartlett did not put that in the remarks. The president just ad-libbed it. As we piloted the limousines to leave the M.A. Booker School, knowing that 2 planes, airliners, had been used as weapons of mass destruction and hit the World Trade Center. The president is in what we call the Beast, the presidential limo. I'm sitting beside him, and he's on his cell phone, I'm on my cell phone, I'm calling back to the White House. He's trying to reach the Secretary of Defense. And he's frustrated that he can't get through. I'm learning that the Pentagon has just been attacked. We drive very fast, and we get to the air base where Air Force One was waiting for us. The limousine comes to a stop, the Secret Service opens the door to the Beast, we step out, and I'm struck by the sound of the engines on Air Force One running. The protocol is that you don't start the engines until the president is safely on the plane. And I said to myself, Mark Tillman must really want to get out of here. By the way, there had been communications that said someone was using the code name for Air Force One, Angel. Does that mean that the bad guys may have a Stinger missile sitting out at the airport? We ran up the gangplank, and before the door was even fully shut, the plane started to roll down the runway. And we lifted off and went kind of straight up, not the long glide path, up to about 48,000 feet, and flew in a serpentine way, waiting for fighter jets to catch up with us. The president, without anybody asking him to do this, said, "I want to get President Putin from Russia on the phone. I don't want him to think that we're doing something that would generate war with him, and I don't want him to react in a way that's not appropriate." I was very impressed that he did that. Nobody told him to do it, but he did. I was also impressed with the conversations that he was having with his national security team and the intelligence community from Air Force One. And yes, I was a witness to him talking with the vice president and authorizing our fighter jet pilots to shoot down commercial jetliners that were not responding to the FAA communications to land. And when the president hung up the phone, he leaned forward across his desk and said to me, "I cannot imagine receiving that order. I was an Air National Guard pilot. I just can't imagine receiving that order." But I authorized it. Flight 93, United Flight 93, crashed into Shanksville, Pennsylvania, a few minutes after that. I will admit that I and some others on Air Force One wondered if it was one of us that shot down that plane. But instead, it was civilians who had called from that plane to loved ones on the ground and learned about the attacks on the World Trade Center and the U.S. Pentagon. And they decided to do something about it. And they were the first heroes of the war on terror. And every one of them would have earned the Medal of Honor if they'd been in the military. But they weren't. They huddled together, they prayed, and then they said, "Let's roll." And they rushed the cabin, and as you know, the plane crashed into Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Thousands of lives were probably saved by that unselfish act by those civilians. Because that target probably was the US Capitol. We then flew to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. I said I wanted to go to a place that had a long runway, good security, good communications, within 45 minute to an hour flight from where we were. We went to Barksdale Air Force Base. The president taped some remarks for the American people. I had to make decisions on who goes with us to the next stop, which was the Strategic Air Command in Omaha, Nebraska. And I decided that those who needed to be on the plane would be on the plane. Those who didn't need to be on the plane but wanted to would not be on the plane. We then flew to Omaha, Nebraska, and Stratcom went to a deep bunker way underground. It was right out of the movies. You could see all these flat screen TVs and generals and admirals. And you could hear all of the communication of the FAA and the military. You could hear the fog of war, the misinformation, the questions. There's a plane coming in from Madrid, it's not identifying itself. Oh, wait a minute, it's one of ours that's coming in from Madrid, Ohio. The president turned to me and said, can we go back to Washington, D.C. now? He had been asking me to go back the whole time. And I kept saying, I know you want to make that decision, but I don't think you should make it right now. I checked with the pilot of Air Force One, I checked with the Secret Service. The Secret Service was reluctant but acquiesced. The pilot had confirmed that Andrews Air Force Base had been swept and would probably be okay. We then flew to Andrews Air Force Base, and on the flight there, we could see on the television screens on Air Force One what was happening at the World Trade Center. The buildings were burning. People were jumping out of windows. And then the buildings collapsed. It was haunting. That image still haunts me to this day. The EMTs, firefighters, policemen that ran toward the building rather than away from it, saved lives and gave theirs. So Peter was right when he said that the anniversary that we're approaching. Remember what happened. Those of you who are 20 or younger, all you see is a picture. Those of us who are older, and I'm a septuagenarian, that means in the 70s, really old. We promised never to forget, and we don't want it to happen again. So, as we approach September 11th of 2021, please have a conscience to stop and say thank you. Thank you to the heroes that ran toward the disaster. Say, I won't forget you. The people who are on those planes, just going to work, going to visit friends in Los Angeles, excited about the birth of a grandchild. Over 95 people from Massachusetts died that day. We promise never to forget. Don't forget. I'm going to ask you to talk to someone who is like in middle school today. Tell them about what happened on September 11th. And I'd like you to remember not only what happened on September 11th, but also think about September 14th, 2001. There was an iconic picture of me whispering in the president's ear taken on September 11th. I am not iconic. The photograph is, it does define an era. But there's a picture from September 14th, 2001, that has the president standing on a crushed fire vehicle at Ground Zero, with his arm around a firefighter named Bob Beckwith. And the president is holding a megaphone. And as he starts to speak, someone in the crowd yells out, "I can't hear you. I can't hear you." And the president says, "I can hear you, and the whole world will hear us." Everybody in America that day dropped some of their favorite labels: Republican, Democrat. They proudly said, "We're Americans," and we were united. As the president was giving that impromptu speech with no notes, nothing practiced, no words suggested to him, Congress was voting on a war resolution. And it passed unanimously in the United States Senate, and with only one dissenting vote, and over 400 votes for it in the House. America came together. In the days that followed, record numbers of people said, "I want to become a police officer. I want to become a firefighter. I want to join the military. I want to join the intelligence services." We celebrate that as we remember what happened on September 11th. So, thank you for allowing me to speak to you. I thank the President for the hospitality. I thank all of you for coming. Step back. Recognize the pain that is still felt by many people in Massachusetts. I've addressed the group that works to make sure that we remember their loved ones who died that day. They will never forget, and we promised we wouldn't either. With that, I say God bless you, and I don't know if there's an opportunity for me to ask if any of you have any questions. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have. Absent that, I will say thank you to those who signed up and served as policemen, firemen, EMTs. Thank you to those who serve in our military. Thank you for those who serve in our intelligence services. Thank you for those who serve our democracy, especially the ones that have the courage to say, "I am running for office, and I want to serve in Framingham, or Natick, or Wellesley. I want to serve on Beacon Hill. I want to serve on Capitol Hill. I want to serve at the White House." We're a great democracy. Polish it by getting involved. Thank you very much, and God bless you. Speak loudly, I have an old man wearing hearing aids.
Hi, my name's Donna Gregoric, and I live here in Framingham, and I was wondering why it was your responsibility to call the shot to go to Louisiana as opposed to someone from the Defense Department or someone from the CIA or some other kind of official giving you that advice.
the question basically is, what gave me permission to make the decisions where to take the president on that day? Is that fair enough if I put it that way? Well, the role of a chief of staff, my job is to make sure the president can do his job. And I pay attention to, number one, making sure that people do not bring overly emotional issues to the debate and as emotions. He's got to make tough decisions. We want to have it, cool, calm, and collected with a firm debate about the policy and the issues that he has to put forward. When it came to his responsibilities on September 11, 2001, they were truly unique. Think of the message I delivered to him. It's a very rare message. It hasn't been delivered to too many presidents. We are at war. The second thing, we were attacked. The really thing is, we were attacked. We were only attacked 2 other times. War of 1812 and World War II. We had attacked on 9/11. I also had to deliver that message in a venue that was very strange. Normally you would have gone into the Oval Office with 4 or 5 people and said, this is what's happening. Or you would have woken the president up in the middle of the night and there would have been other people there with it. No. He was in a class sitting in front of 2nd graders when I delivered the message, so it was very strange. So my primary job was to make sure the president had at his hands all of the tools that he needed to make tough decisions, and which meant he had to have good communications. The communications on Air Force One is very, very good. We made it even better after 9/11 because there were some glitches. We learned from it. But the communications was very good. I also knew that the best communications in our intelligence and national defense area is in the big bunkers around the world, around the country, that the president goes to in case of a disaster. And obviously, Strategic Air Command in Omaha, Nebraska would be one of those places. So that's why I wanted to go to STRATCOM, where we had good communications with people who would really know what was happening. And I also went to Barksdale because I knew the president wanted to tape a message for the American people, and we wanted to tape it in such a way that it would be presented after he had departed that venue. So we could land there, get some people off of Air Force One. He could have good secure communications back to Washington, D.C. We met in the commandant's office on the base. And we were all working the phones to get back to Washington, D.C. And then we trimmed the number of people on Air Force One. We flew the STRATCOM where we had outstanding communications, and the president could make tough decisions. And then we learned that it was now comfortable for the president to be able to be taken back to Washington, D.C., where he really wanted to go. He wanted the world to see him at the White House, but he wanted to be able to communicate with the American people. He did communicate from Barksdale, but that was something that was taped. It was released right after we lifted off from Barksdale Air Force Base, in case the enemy was trying to track where we were. And we didn't know. You have to remember, we thought there were other attacks coming. We thought Chicago, San Francisco, LA, Dallas, Houston could be likely targets as well. So we were trying to understand what the situation in the sky was like. And I want to give a shout out to the Canadians, the Canadian friends that we have. They took in many flights from Europe and housed them up in Newfoundland. And if you haven't seen the movie, is it Come From Away? Come From Away is a play that I would encourage all of you to see. It's about all the planes that landed on 9/11 and how nice the people of Gander, Newfoundland were to the folks in those planes. But the FAA did a phenomenal job, thanks to Jane Garvey, who was the FAA administrator, and Norman Netta, who was the Secretary of Transportation. But we went where the best communications would allow the president to have the best information to make decisions. I talked with the Secret Service regularly about protecting the president. Most people do not realize that the Secret Service has kind of superpower if the president is in danger. They actually can take over some of the decision-making process and command certain decisions where the president should be to be safe. And so I was very sensitive about working with the Secret Service and obviously the military, especially the pilot of Air Force One, who had to make sure we all landed safely. But that's what we did. I don't think that anyone from the Pentagon would have suggested that we go in any other direction. I met with the 2 military aides on the trip and to decide where to send us, and I took their advice. They gave me 3 or 4 options, and I picked Barksdale Air Force Base, which was their first choice, and candidly was our first choice for the first stop. And then Strategic Air Command is the second stop before we get to Washington, D.C. Is there any other questions?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm here.
Speak nice and loud.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for your very thorough, quick decision-making that is really impressive to hear. Those are details that none of us really know about. So you implied, or you said something about how some changes have been made since that had happened. Can you touch a little bit upon, because I'm sure there's plenty to cover with that, but can you touch a little bit upon what would make something like that less likely to happen today?
Question is, could something that happened on September 11, 2001 happen today? Is that fair? I will start off by saying the war on terror is not over. There are terrorist groups that would like to attack us, and we know some about them, we don't know all about them. But it's up to all of the world, the world that recognizes that you should not harbor terrorists and allow them to train and plan and execute terrorist acts. And it's up to the UN leadership and to the national leadership in each country to help the world rid itself of terror. We're not there yet. Maybe your question is alluding to what's happening in Afghanistan right now, and as to whether or not it is something that we should be concerned about. I would say, I think it's perfectly well to understand the frustration with being at war for 20 years. And there is war fatigue. But I don't want anyone who's served in the military to think that we're not really, really proud of them and the sacrifices that they made weren't worth it. They kept the mission that President Bush set them into Afghanistan for, which was to make sure Afghanistan was not a place that would harbor terrorists where they could plan and execute terrorist attacks against the United States of America and our allies. And for 20 years, they met that mission, phenomenally successfully. They should stand with pride. We have pulled out of Afghanistan. Yes, I think there is some controversy around it. Personally, I wish we were remaining in Bagram, because I think if we had a physical presence in the country, and yes, it would require us to have a protective force there, that we would be a good conscience for the leadership of Afghanistan, no matter what the leadership is. And that we would also be able to have better intelligence from a human point of view rather than just the technologies that we use today. So I kind of wish we had Bagram. I do think that we got out of there a little faster on a timeline that was a little faster than I thought was realistic. And I think some of the tactical moves in the last 10 days of being in Kabul at Kaza Airport, trying to get people out, was left a lot to be desired. And I feel terrible about those many Americans that are still there, and there are probably 100 to 200. And I feel terrible about all of those Afghan citizens who helped our armed forces and our intelligence communities with a promise that we would help them come to the United States. So I want us to keep our word, and I think that we should be a conscience so that we work as a nation to do that. I'm going to give a shout out to the woman I love, my wife, Kathleen, who I met in the 5th grade in Holbrook, Massachusetts. And we've been married for 54 years. For 20 years, she has been very active as a member of the U.S. Afghan Women's Council. And she's actually been to Afghanistan. And she's been to the schools where young girls were being educated. She met with some of the remarkable women over there that have not only been educated, they became educators. And they served in government. And they saw advancements. And she has been on the phone and on Zoom meetings with other people who are trying to make sure that all the gains that were made by women in Afghanistan are not thrown away. And unfortunately, just today, we learned that the Taliban already has banned women's sports in Afghanistan, so women cannot participate in sports. But my wife has been a wonderful conscience, and more than a conscience, she's been engaged in helping to call attention to the plight of some of our people that we promised we would protect and empower. So we as Americans should rally. I do not want to undermine what President Biden is doing. I believe very strongly that we should respect the burden the president has to carry, but I do have second guessing on his decision to abandon Bagram Air Force Base the way we did, the way we released prisoners the way we did, which was actually done under President Trump. And also, I feel it was bad that we departed Kabul the way we did, leaving so many behind where we had promised as a nation to protect them. Did I answer your question? In terms of being safer, my fear that the Taliban may have changed their rhetoric, but their deeds have not changed. And I don't think we can trust them until they show that they will actually keep the words that they say. When they say we'll let people leave the country, they should let people leave the country. When they said they will let people go to school, they should let people go to school. I think we should really be a tough conscience on them. I do worry that terrorist organizations, ISIS-K for one, which is an enemy of the Taliban and an enemy of the United States, but they clearly feel empowered now that the Taliban are in business. And I do worry about Afghanistan becoming a haven for terrorists. Go back to the speech that the president gave on the night of September 11, 2001. It was at 8:30 from the Oval Office. It was a very short speech, but he changed American foreign policy when he said to leaders of other nations around the world, he said, if you harbor terrorists, you will be just as guilty as the terrorists. You're either with us or against us. And I'll never forget, the first phone call we got from a world leader was Muammar Gaddafi of Libya. And he says, I'm with you, I am with you, I am with you. I'll be an ally. And President Musharraf in Pakistan was probably saying, oh, please, I want to be with you and against you at the same time. So that was a dramatic speech that changed foreign policy. We still have that policy in place. If you harbor terrorists, you are just as guilty as the terrorists. And I do expect President Biden understands that and would help to keep that policy in place so that terrorism does not have any place where it can foment and deliver on the evil that they delivered on September 11, 2001 ever again.
One more question?
Hi, Mr. Carr. My name's Caroline McDonald. I'm a senior child and family studies major here at Framingham State. My question for you is, what made you, how did you realize you had to address the president knowing that you had children ages 6 to 7 in the room without frightening them? How did you know you need to utilize your words properly without worrying them and freaking out?
On September 11th?
Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, I am old enough so that all of our children are now older than my wife and I are. Because I don't get as old as I am. So on September 11th, 2001, believe it or not, we were empty nesters. So I didn't have to worry about our children at home. I did worry about my wife, but my wife is a remarkable woman, and I have confidence in her. And whether I earned it or not, she has had confidence in me. And she wanted me to do my job for the president, and I was fully focused on September 11th about paying attention to my job and helping the president make brutally tough decisions. So I truly had compartmentalized any fear and only directed it towards, I had the fear of another attack. I didn't have the fear that my wife was in trouble, or my children were in trouble, or my grandchildren were in trouble. My fear was that the United States might have another attack imposed on it. And that I felt that we had a responsibility to be very mature and not selfish as we looked at the challenges of 9/11. And so it took great discipline. Your question also suggests, what was my journey to be? How did I become Forrest Gump on an Air Force One plane? I grew up in Holbrook, Massachusetts, which is not that far from here, and I represented in the legislature Holbrook and Braintree for 4 years, and then Holbrook, Abington, and Whitman for 4 years. And then I had a forgettable campaign for governor of Massachusetts. I remember standing before a crowd after the primaries that I did not win, and I was very proud of my campaign volunteers, and we were standing together with my family, was with me. My son was about 7 at the time, and I said I was really proud of my 3rd place finish in the Republican primary for governor. And my son yanked my head and said, "Dad, you came in last." I preferred to think it was 3rd. A remarkable thing happened because I answered the call to duty in our Constitution. My grandmother had been a suffragette. She was born in 1894, and she was very well educated for her day. Went to Simmons College, she was very well educated. She was a militant suffragette who actually paraded down Commonwealth Avenue in Boston wearing a white dress. Women should vote! Women should vote! Women's suffrage. So I grew up in a family where politics was not a dirty word. It was a noble word. And she used to say the most important word in the Constitution is the very first word. We. It's our government. And she said that when I was your age, the we didn't apply to me. But when women got the right to vote, it did. And she said, answer the invitation that our Constitution gives us. It gives us unconditional rights, and we don't have to do anything to earn them. They're in the Constitution. But in terms of participating in government, it's all based on you accepting the invitation to be part of government. You're part of government. You accepted the invitation. You ran for office. You had the courage to run and the willingness to accept defeat if it happened. So I say to you, celebrate the we in the Constitution, be part of the we, jump into government, run for office, definitely vote. Register to vote and vote. That's the simplest thing. Find passion, embrace it, fight for issues you believe in, support people you believe in, have the courage to run, and remember, I like to say this, and it pains me. When I got involved in politics, in the district I represented in Massachusetts in the legislature was overwhelmingly Democrat. I'm a Republican. And I got elected in 1974. Most of you don't remember this, but that was the worst year to be a Republican. It was the time of Watergate. Terrible time to say you were a Republican. The district that I was running for state representative in was 6-1 Democrat. There were 6 Democrats for every registered Republican. There were more independents than there were Republicans. And even my father said to me, "What are you doing?"
Hey, Andy, get on the microphone. I'm 88 years old and I can't hear.
At any rate,
There you go.
the invitation to be part of our government is crucial. We, you are part of the we, have the courage to get up and get involved in politics. I got elected in a district overwhelmingly Democrat as a Republican because I recognize that if you're going to represent people, you represent all the people. You don't just represent the people that elected you. You were representing all the people. And when I got involved in politics, the rug of American politics had more rug than fringe. Today, it seems it has more fringe than rug. But it's really hard to govern if you don't accept permission to stand on the rug and say, I want to represent everybody, right, left, and in between, and find a way to communicate, work together, and to do something that our founding fathers did on day one before the Constitution was adopted. They compromised. And they gave us the greatest political document in the history of the world, the U.S. Constitution. So, a long answer to your question. Get involved in politics, be proud of it, have views, be respectful of other people's views. My grandmother used to say when we sat around the dining room table, she would throw these issues on the table and we had to respond to it. She was very careful in what she put on the table, but she said she wanted to know what we thought about it. And when we said stupid things, she would say, I understand why you're saying that, but I want you to do a little bit more homework. So tomorrow night when you sit at dinner, do a little homework and tell me if you thought you said was smart or dumb. And if we all agreed, she would say, whoa, 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 whoa. We're in a democracy. Everybody doesn't have to agree. Bring your passion and your parochial concerns to the debate and your view of perfection, and you can argue for perfection. But if you demand perfection in your image, you're going to turn into a dictator. So bring your view of perfection to the debate, have the courage to listen to others, and find a path to something that is really good, maybe not perfect. And that's what makes our democracy great. So my answer is please get involved. You can be on the sidelines, but at least open your mouth. And then I would say, take a step, register to vote. Take another step, vote. Take another step, challenge. Run. Learn what it's like to be a member of the school board. My first elected office was on the planning board in Holbrook, Massachusetts. Curb cuts, cul-de-sacs, lots of debate. 5-year term, no money, and a great experience. Yes, I've served for 8 years in the Massachusetts House. I had the privilege of being the Republican whip. There were not many Republicans to whip when I was in the Massachusetts House. I ran for governor, loved running for governor, was very grateful to the people who supported me, and I celebrated the people who won, and I didn't despise any of them. I maybe didn't agree with them, but I honored the system that allows us to participate and then to understand the results. So I don't challenge election results the way other people have in the past. I actually think we are voting with integrity, and our local officials are among the most honest people that serve our democracy. So I support the work that's being done to say, get people to vote. It makes a difference. Thank you very much. I overstayed my welcome. God bless you, and please take another time to reflect quietly on September 11th. There were victims in your neighborhood. Believe it or not, there are still victims dying today because of some of the lingering concerns. And I'm going to give a shout out to one remarkable person who happened to have been a staffer for Senator Ted Kennedy for a number of years. And he left that position and earned a great reputation as a lawyer. And he was wonderful because he agreed, President Bush asked him if he would be in charge of taking care of distributing money from the government to the victims and their families of 9/11. And he said, I will do it, but I will not take any pay. I'll do it for $1. And he literally met with the families of every one of the victims of 9/11 and made those unbelievably tough choices about this is how much that life was worth, knowing that you could never put a price on life. So I say, thank you. God bless you, and please, 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 remember 9/11 and polish our democracy by being part of it. Thank you very much.